Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ice Cold Takes podcast. I'm your host, Joey DeMeglio, and after losing four straight for the first time all season, Kaapo Kakko returned to the Rangers lineup, giving the Rangers some much-needed depth and helping them win two straight against the Capitals and Kraken. Joining me today to talk about Kakko's return and a bit about the 2024 NHL Draft is our friend, Drew Way. Thanks for being here again, Drew. How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. Glad that the internet is working this time so far, right? Everything
Yeah,
good?
yeah. Knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on.
Yep,
Exactly.
yep,
Yeah,
yep. Everything's going well here, though. Kids were sick for a while, and work's busy, but things are starting to settle down now. So,
that's good. Well, things are settling down for the Rangers because after losing four straight, like I said, they got Kakko back. They look pretty good against the Kraken. Pretty smooth sailing game aside from that second period. What did you think about that?
yeah, I mean, one of the things we were chatting about last week in the Lost episode, once your internet crapped out, was kind of how Kako's return. Like one of the things we were anticipating was the team to look better and look more even, and particularly look better defensively. And obviously, super small sample size. You don't want to draw any real, um, you know, correlations there. But what we're talking about was, the loss of Kako. Kako's a good player, but like you don't think of seeing like that big of a drop in play that the Rangers had in losing someone like Kako. And obviously they lost Hedel and they lost some other players too. So that, like, there was a lot that went to it. But with Kako in particular, one of the things that hurt was, first the team did not have much right wing depth to begin with. So losing him has a cascading effect across the lineup. And then in addition to that, they don't have a right winger that can play on that top line, unless, of course, you want to take Lafrenière off that second line, which you don't want to do because that second line is the one line that's been doing well. What makes Kako so important to that line in particular is his transitional play. Mika and Kreider, everyone knows what their strengths and weaknesses are. We don't need to get into that now. But what Kako does for them in the offensive zone is, because he does a lot of the board work and kind of handles a lot of the possession, he opens the ice up more for Zibanejad and Kreider to get to the spots where they like on the ice. But more importantly, he's the only one in that line with like true ability to transition from the defensive zone into the offensive zone, and play in the neutral zone there with possession. And then also he's the only one that on that line that is good defensively in transition, and quite frankly, one of the only good players on the entire team that's good in transition. And when you look at some of the stats of how the Rangers have done with and without Kakko, with Kakko, they were one of the best defensive teams in transition in the NHL. Without him, one of the worst. Obviously, that's not all just him, right? But it does speak to, you know, that just because he doesn't put up like eye popping stats on the stat sheet, it's still a big loss in critical areas of the game.
hmm I bet his micro stats are like really good. I haven't talked to Corey Snyder in a little while, so I'll have to ask him about that. But defensively, he's always. I love that he's like always responsible. Like he's always back checking and stuff. He makes a lot of good plays in the defensive zone where it's like, oh yeah, I noticed that one, and then they start the transition.
Hmm.
Up the rush up the ice, like you said. So
Yeah,
he may not get on the score sheet that much, but what he brings to the team is it's undeniable. Like that the Rangers really, really needed it at this point. So like it's only one guy, but it's almost feels like the cavalry has arrived because
oh yeah,
now you
that
move him back up, and then the bottom six is like you have two lines now.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about with like the cascading effect, where it's like all of a sudden Wheeler looks good again back on that third line. Like he didn't belong on that top line given where he is in his career. And so just Kako coming back now stabilizes the top line and improves the third line. And so it's again cascading effect, just that one player like taking him out, like he was kind of like almost a house of cards, sort of fell apart in
Mhm.
certain areas. But now having him back, Wheeler can slot back into where he belongs, and the rest of the lineup can start to settle in. And now it's really just you need Heedle to come back eventually, and we're finally starting to get some good news there. And they just need to figure out what they need in the fourth line. And quite honestly, that's probably matchup dependent. There's some teams where you probably want to go with some of the quicker, more offensively gifted guys that they have available to them that can play in that fourth line. And other game, teams where they'd want a more defensive presence out of that line. And they
Mhm.
have enough guys who, whether it's in Hartford or in New York, that can play on that fourth line, and so they can probably do a bit of mix and matching there, based on the opponent, especially come playoff time. Like obviously you don't want to get too cute with that in the regular season because all the cap implications and the teams like right up against the cap and stuff like that. But once the playoffs come and you can bring up a couple extra people, like it just gives them some more optionality.
Mhm. Yeah, and you mentioned about, like, the House of Cards effect, like, that cascading effect. That's
Hmm.
what we were talking about last week before the episode cut out, was about how, I think I was asking, like, Kako made the team, like, a lot better defensively, just adding that presence there. And no, it's a very small sample size, only 2 games, but, I mean, the chances are still loud against, but way better, way
Hmm.
better. Like that, the third period against the Kraken felt like, I tweeted about it. Um, it felt more like the October wins, like the way they shut it down, because like that was the identity of the Rangers. Like the third period was one of their biggest strengths, and within the first month or so of the season, they always played really strong in the third period. And then when they were losing in their losing streak, they weren't playing that strong in the third period. So it kind of like it evened out once Kako got there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, it's just the pieces fit together now with Kako back
Mhm.
in the lineup, and a lot of that is to do with Kako's play and how he fits, and then just also, like I said, the lack of depth the team has on the right side. It's
Yeah.
it's easier for them to withstand a loss to say Kreider because of other options they have on the left side than it is to withstand a loss on that right side.
So do you think like that Kreider and Zibanejad should still be split up? I know some people were saying that, it's since Buchnevich left, it's been a revolving door on the right side, and like Kreider and Zibanejad can't get it going at even strength. Do you think they should be split up, or with Kako there, do you think that line is fine?
I mean, we'll see. I think it's definitely an option that they should have in the back of their minds. And now that Kako is back, let him settle in, let that line settle in. Give him a couple, a week or two, and see if they settle back into, doing better at 5-on-5. And they were decent in the beginning of the year, not nearly as bad as they were last year, and not nearly as bad as they were after Kako left.
Hmm.
So I'd say, give it a chance, let Kako settle in, see how those top two lines continue to do. And you know what, if it's good and no issues, then just stick with it. But if it's continues to be a problem on that top line in particular at 5-on-5, then yeah, start to just play around with different things. And the one thing, it's always easy for us to say, but it's probably a lot harder for coaches, when it comes to like chemistry and dynamics. Like, if I have to assume Kreider and Zibanejad really like playing together and really want to play together. And so that's a factor that I know some people are like, oh, well, it's the coach's job to just tell them, and say, it's not that easy. Like, as someone who,
Hmm.
I manage a bunch of people at work, and a lot of times, the right thing to do, whether it's business wise or the team wise, doesn't always resonate with the actual human beings that you're managing. And so it's, again, easier said than done. But yeah, it definitely should be something that Laviolette has in the back of his mind. And especially since, even with the downturn in their play, like they're still top of their division. They're still comfortably in a playoff spot. And come, as the season progresses, and assuming they still have a nice cushion, like it doesn't hurt to start playing around just to see what you got and what you don't got.
Hmm. And yeah, everything's better when you're winning too. So I like that Laviolette didn't galaxy brain it when Kako came back from injury. He didn't put him on the third line. He just put him right back into the spot that he was at the very beginning of the season. I feel like with Gallant, he probably he would have kept Wheeler in the top line and put Kako down on the third line. But I'm glad that Laviolette just, let's put Kako back up there.
Yeah,
I'm glad he did that.
yeah. I mean, and Laviolette, like clearly, like this team seems to like him and is playing for him. And to this point, he knows what buttons to push. And the thing with professional coaches is every coach, for the most part, with a few exceptions, like they just have a natural shelf life, right? Because at some point that voice just gets old and you just need to hear it from someone else. And it's in like the workplace culture, like they call it, like hearing through a filter, right? And one thing as a manager you always want to avoid is you want to try to recognize when, like, if one of your employees or someone's talking to you and you're kind of just like, yeah, this is the kind of shit you always say. Like, you want to always try to be mindful of that, recognize it, and not do that. But professional athletes, like these aren't things that they're taught or coached on. Like I literally have a management coach that I meet with twice a month, and this is one of the things they talk about, right? And number one is recognizing that you're doing it, and it's just natural for professional athletes who are elite in what they do, top 0.01% in the whole world, to at some point just be like, yeah, 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 and kind of start nodding and smiling the coach, and the voice gets old.
Yeah, I like this little interpersonal analogy here. I like it.
Well, that's
Def
at the end of the day, like one of the things that you always have to remember is like a coach's job on top, in addition to the tactical and the lines, it's managing people and managing personalities, managing humans. And so there actually are a lot of implications for like, the corporate world management philosophies that do translate into sports.
I would have been interested to see, like, if this sort of four-game losing streak happened, if Laviolette was, like, in his 3rd year with the Rangers, would he have panicked? Like, because he seemed so calm and cool, like, he didn't panic or anything. Like, he didn't say, like, "Oh, we need to make a whole bunch of changes." Like, "We just need to stick to our plan and get the job done, come back with a win here, and stop the bleeding here." I feel like with another coach, it would be like, "All right, this guy's moving up here, this guy's moving down here," or you're doing bag skates every practice until you win.
Yeah, and like sometimes a bag skate is a good thing, right? Like every once in a while, if the team
Oh,
really
yeah.
just has a dog shit performance and they mail it in, they're all hungover, they don't try whatever. Like, okay, yeah, you know what, you do need to bring the hammer here and there. But I think Laviolette also does a good job of recognizing like what's working, what's not working, and like in this 4-game losing streak, like yes, like it sucks, and the Rangers didn't play how we had come to expect this year. But if you look at each game, like a lot of those games, they were pretty good for like big chunks of it, but then would have like this 5-minute stretch where everything falls apart. They let in
Mhm,
2 or 3 goals, and then that's it. And so it's a good thing for him to be able to kind of take a step back and recognize, like, overall, like this wasn't a bag skate worthy performance. We just got to figure out why in multiple games in a row did we have this, 5 minutes where everything just fell apart.
mhm. Would you pin it more on, like, an individual, like, "Alright, this player screwed up," or was it is it, like, more of a team collapse in your eyes?
I mean, it's both. It depends. Like in one of the games, like there was, I forget, I'm blanking on which game it was, but like there was a 2-minute stretch where Miller and Truba, that pairing was just abhorrent, and they let in 2 goals, and it's like that kind of. I think that was the Montreal game, right? And like that was just sort of the end of that. But there are other games where it's just like they can't get anything going as a team, and there's this like 5-10 minute stretch where no matter what line, what pair is on the ice, they can't get it out of their own zone. If they finally do, they're just stopped at the opposing red line, and they immediately get turned around and a chance against. And
Mhm.
so it's there were some games where I think there were isolated players where you can kind of point the finger at if you want to do that, but other games where it was just like a team collective meltdown for a few minutes.
Yeah, I think it's definitely more of a team collective meltdown, like you just said. In previous years, it was more of an individual, like, all right, yeah, Trooper messed up here. He's the one to blame. But this year, some of the players like Schneider and Miller have their faults for sure, but I still feeling like it's a good team, and a lot of the blame falls on the team and like everybody in front of the goalie
Hmm.
for letting him down. I mean, Shesterkin hasn't been the greatest this year. He's not, but he's probably just down there, like back down to earth because he was playing at such a high level for a while, and we knew that that level of success wasn't sustainable. Um, but like going forward, what changes do you think the Rangers are going to make at the deadline? Do you think they're going to prioritize more depth for that bottom six, or go after top six forward? Uh,
Yeah,
there's
I
some
mean,
guys out there like I don't even know if Eberle's considered a top six forward, but I was
it,
talking about him last week.
it's hard to say, really, just because when they're so tight up against the cap too. There's like so many things where like if this guy gets injured for a couple weeks and you can't put him on LTIR, but you have to call up someone, like now that eats away at your available cap space. And um, I think it'll largely come down to how does this team play in the next few weeks, and can Heedle come back? I would say if the team continues to progress positively going forward in these next few weeks with Kako back, there's no other injuries, and Heedle comes back and is healthy, then I don't think there's a need to go big fish hunting necessarily. And I think it's you can kind of more target those bottom six or bottom pair guys who can, add to your depth and, fortify certain elements of the game, whether it's, transitional defense or the penalty kill or, clearing out in front of Igor or stuff like that. So I think at this point it's too early to try to say, and it'll really just come down to how do they play in these next few weeks and what updates do we get on Heedle.
Yeah, like if Heedle is just out for the rest of the regular season, then they could just bank that cap money and put it on LTIR. And if they want to go out and make a big fish acquisition, they can with that cap space, or they could spread the wealth and get a couple bottom six guys to bolster and to have like injury replacements as well. Um, but then like the assets too that you have to give up, it'd probably be like I don't know how willing Drury would be to give up prospects. He would probably in the past he's given up draft picks, like later round picks. Like he's kind of just throwing them in there. Is this year's draft, now that we're on the subject of it, is this year's draft like one where you would want to give up your picks? Or is it like last year's where it's like you want to hold on to your picks for this draft class?
I don't think there's ever a year where you quote unquote want to give up your picks. And it's still really early to like try to have some sweeping comment on like, oh, this is a fantastic draft for this and that. And usually, even when people are making comments like that, like it's all based on like who are the top 5 or 10 players. And when your team like the Rangers, like that doesn't matter. Like they're not going to be picking in the top 5 or 10. So these like, quality assessments on the draft that are largely rooted in who are the elite players in the class are totally meaningless to the playoff teams that aren't going to be picking in those areas. But that said, like just how things are looking now, and again, still super early. This is a draft where if you're going to assume the Rangers are picking, somewhere in the mid 20s or so, let's say, there will be players available that fit what they need in terms of like from a positional fit in their pipeline. The Rangers prospect pool is one right now where Gabe Perreault is really only their true blue chip prospect. And then, you have a couple very good prospects like, Brendan Othman, I would not call a blue chip prospect. He's, a very good prospect, but I'd be surprised if Brendan Othman is top line full career, borderline all-star, something like that. Like I think Brendan Othman is most likely, middle six, can do a bit of everything, contributes really well to your team and culture and all that, but he's not going to, be some like end all be all for your team. Whereas like Gabe Perreault can be an elite playmaker for a team. But when you're looking at the Rangers pipeline, like there's two glaring weaknesses in terms of where their quality prospects are. One is center and one is right-handed D. Like when you're looking at their pipeline, like their top forward prospects, all wings. You got Perreault, winger. Othman, winger. Cooley, who just graduated, winger. Sakura, winger. Berard, winger. Malash, winger. Ryder Korzak, does play center, probably will be a winger in the NHL. The only centers up there really are Bryce McConnell-Barker, who is most likely a bottom six center. And then like a Noah Laba, who's probably an AHL player, for being honest. And then when similarly when you look at the defensive side, like they totally lack any top end defensive talent now in their pipeline. And again, because they've graduated Miller and got Fox and graduated Schneider over the years. Then you got obviously. You got Zach Jones, who's sort of like in between the AHL and the NHL right now. But when you're looking at like the who are the true prospects there. It's, Matthew Robertson, lefty, Drew Fortescue, lefty, Rasmus Larson, lefty, and then their first like top right Ds, you have like Ty Emberson, who's like, he's probably not an NHLer, Victor Mancini, probably not going to be an NHLer. And so they definitely really need, a quality right-hand defenseman in the system as well. And so then when you're looking at kind of like, all right, who are guys that may or may not be available there. Like there are a good amount of centers that as of now, are projected to go in the 20s, right? You have, for one, Jerome McGinley's son, Tidge Iginla, who, he's sort of listed as just a forward, but he does play center. You have this kid, Luke Misa, he's from Mississauga in the OHL, but he's more of the small but like dynamic type. And then you have like a guy like Michael Hage, who's plays for Chicago Steel, who's like a big physical but does everything and does it well, and was like a top prospect, but just hasn't had like the best year this year, largely because the Chicago Steel aren't the powerhouse that they normally are. So you definitely have like multiple center options that are likely to be available in that range that could fit what the Rangers might want. And then, defensively too, you also have kind of like a variety of guys that could fit, what they want to do. If they want the more defensive defenseman, you have like an EJ Emery who plays for the U.S. Development Program. If you want a more offensive defenseman, he plays on the left side, but you have like Cole Hudson, who his older brother is like a offensive dynamo, but tiny water bug type defenseman. He's a little bit bigger than his brother, but really good offensive defenseman. There's about like probably 3 or 4 kind of defensemen that'll likely be available in that area worth taking there. It's same on the centers where it would really, none of them is going to help the team the next year or two, but would really bolster their prospect pool in areas where they really need some more quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think there's like huge pieces out there, like not like last year's trade deadline. I
Mm-hmm.
think the guys that are available are more like depth pieces. Like you have Elias Lindholm. I I don't know who else is like tops on the list, like in terms of available players for trade. So I don't know if it's worth it to give up the first round pick based on what the Rangers are lacking in their pipeline from what you just told me. So yeah, I mean, but any first round pick is good though. I know it's not going to be top 10 pick because the Rangers are a good team, but they didn't have a top 10 pick last year and they got Gabe Perreault. But that
Mm-hmm.
was a deep draft. But in any draft, if you're scouting and stuff and you're sure on these prospects, then it's safe. It's probably safer to just go with that guy and build for
Well,
the future too.
that and your number one pick is a valuable asset. Like even if you're not keeping it for the sake of using it, right? Like it's still like you have to think of what's more valuable, like the addition that this player will give us to a potential playoff run, or having this as an asset come the off season, whether it's to use yourself or trade in something to improve the roster next year. And so that's why you just don't want to be like, well, this is the top guy on the board, so around trade deadline, so therefore you have to give up your first round
Right,
pick for it.
right.
It's like no, like sometimes there really aren't guys that are first round pick worthy to trade for. I would expect, again, assuming health of the team, I would expect a, a tactic similar to a couple of years ago where they get like a few mid-tier guys, where it's like Andrew Kopp was the big one where it was like, okay, you get a second, and if we make it to the conference finals you get a first, which we did, or whatever it was, the semifinals, you
Yeah,
get a
yeah.
first.
No, it was a conference
Yeah.
finals. You're right.
Yeah. I could see maybe something like that where it's like performance dependent, because then that takes away a little bit of the risk of, hey, how much value is this guy really adding compared to, the value of that pick. But I could see, guys like, at the time, like, Frank Petrano and stuff like that, where they traded a couple mid-round picks, bolstered their depth, and that really helped them in the playoffs. Like, again, assuming health and none of our top guys go down, I could see an approach like that where just bolster your depth. And because in the playoffs, it's a war of attrition, everyone's going to get hurt, and it's not a bad thing to have a couple, spare parts to plug in that can, handle their own in the playoffs if need be.
Yeah, like those mid-round picks. Is this draft like deep enough where it's like, you're gonna find some hidden gems in the later rounds?
You always do. You'll always find hidden gems in the later rounds, and no matter what draft you're looking at, whether it's a quote unquote good draft or a bad draft, because just again, like you're taking 18-year-old kids, right? And and even in the NFL, people are wrong all the time in the NFL draft, and you're drafting 21 and 22-year-olds who you've watched play in the U.S. collegiate system for 2, 3, 4 years. Like here, you're drafting 17, 18, 19-year-olds that most of which aren't playing in the US, and they're probably playing in the junior leagues in Canada, or in the junior leagues, the minor leagues in Czechia or Finland or Sweden. And yeah, it's so much more of a crapshoot, because it's not like, at least in football, you have sort of everyone's coming from the same league, so it's
Yeah.
easier to kind of benchmark them against one another. Whereas this, like, all the leagues have different styles, some have different rules, some have different rink sizes, all of which that make a big deal. And again, they're 17, 18, 19. Like, they still have so much physical growing, mental maturity, and skill development to go.
Right, it's hard for them to come ready day one.
Yeah.
That's why you don't see, like, the first overall picks like the Matthews, McDavids come in, light it up right away. I mean, Bedard, of course, is now in that class too. But one player that seems to have finally hit his stride that we've previously talked about a lot, you and I on here, is Alexis Lafrenière, and this year it looks like it may not be you may not see it on the score sheet, but he looks like a completely different player from what he has been on the Rangers, this season. What do you think about how Lafreniere has been playing as Panarin's right winger this year?
Yeah, it's amazing what happens to a young player when he's got a coach that's confident in him, right? Again, back to my little managerial spiel there. Like, you're managing humans. Like, they're not robots that just go out and perform. And confidence is a big deal, especially for younger players who haven't established themselves and therefore, don't need like the coach to pat them on the back and say good job. And then on top of that, he's a Lafreniere is a playmaker who he can do a bit of he can shoot and dangle and stuff like that. But it's his vision, his intelligence, his hockey sense. Like, these are things that were really lauded about him coming into the NHL. And like, gee, shocker, put him in with another high IQ player like Artemi Panarin and watch him take off.
It was a good move to put him on the right wing because I remember, like, that was the thing. It's like, oh, okay, his natural side is the left side, but if you could just make that adjustment, just play hockey and get on the right side, play with
Well,
Panarin.
and stick with it and give it a chance.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I think like Gallant and maybe Quinn did at one point, like, put Lafreniere on a different line or on the right side for like a game or two, but then gave up. It's like, you can't do that. You have to give it a few weeks to see if it gels, and
Mhm.
as in, are they learning, are they developing, stuff like that. Because it is a decent difference, playing on your offhand side. Everything about how you're receiving cross ice passes is different, or making those cross ice passes, how you have to angle your body to shoot from that side of it. It is quite different. It's not just like, oh, why can't he just play the other side?
Yeah, and one thing about Lafreniere that I love is how aggressive he is. Like,
Mhm.
he's very talented, high IQ, like you said, but I love that his forechecking ability. I love that. He's always creating turnovers. He drew 4 penalties against Washington on Sunday. That's crazy. He's one of the leaders on the Rangers in penalties drawn per 60, one of my favorite stats to look at on Natural Stat Trick. I think it's close to 2, probably not like Gauthier level, but it's kinda close. Like, Gauthier was ridiculous last year.
Well, that
It
was just because he was so fast that guys just
Yeah,
like would hook him and stuff to
it would
for
tug
the.
on his jersey.
But to your point, like, the fact that Lafreniere is not a burner yet still is accumulating all these penalties, like, just shows like the level of intelligence he's playing with
Yeah.
it, whether it's he's getting guy like kind of baiting guys to hook him, or even, like, again, he's a lot shiftier and more slippery this year, to kind of, again, use like a football term. Whereas, like, he's really showing that ability this year to kind of just make like that quick shift and get on the inside, and that is what draws a lot of penalties, where he's on the outside of the defender, and then all of a sudden he kind of quickly shifts to the inside, and then all of a sudden he's getting hooked and tugged on. And
Mhm.
yeah, and then again, the willingness to go in front of the net, the willingness to fight along the boards and forecheck, like, that all help draw penalties as well. And he's also a little bit of a shit, and you can see him in the scrums and stuff like that. And I would venture a guess that if you kind of looked at when a lot of these penalties are taken against him, they're more in the second half of the game than the first, and that would be a testament that he's just getting under their skin a bit as the game goes on.
Yeah, he's a problem for the other team. Like,
Yeah.
remember, the narrative a couple years ago, it's like, all right, the Rangers need tough to play against players, they need more sandpaper. Lafreniere has developed into one of those guys. Like,
Kako is too. And
yep,
it's amazing
yeah.
too, because these people that usually say, "Oh, we need more grit and sandpaper," and they're usually talking about American players and make comments like, "Oh, Europeans are soft and this and that," or, um, gee, two non-Americans are kind of leading the way there. And
Right.
yeah, it's like I said, it's if anyone who's not happy with the progress Lafreniere's make is has made, is they're just looking for reasons to be a hater at this
Mhm.
point. Like, again, okay, you can open up the conversation of, has he lived up to the original billing? Like, well, no, probably not, but it's not a lot of people don't. But is he a good contributor? Is he valuable to the team? Is he progressing from one year to the next and throughout each season? Absolutely.
Rangers fans need to stop comparing like Kakko to Jack Hughes or Lafreniere to Jack Hughes because
So stupid.
it's not the same thing. Jack
Yeah.
Hughes is clearly the better player. Just look at the players like Kakko and Lafreniere for what they're providing to the team right now, to their team.
Hmm.
Don't look at what other players are providing to their team. Like, I mean, Stützle is like a top line scorer pretty much, but Lafreniere is not for the Rangers. He's like secondary scoring. But does that make like Lafreniere a bad player? No, not necessarily. I mean, he's a good fit, yeah, but like you don't have to judge it like where he was taken in the draft. Like you go back, look at Ekblad when he was drafted first overall from the Panthers. Draisaitl was drafted after him. Does that mean Ekblad's a bad player? No, Ekblad's a great player. I mean, when he stays healthy, of course, but
Yeah.
like that argument, I kind of like want to put it off to on the
Well,
shelf, like shelf it.
the correlation I always make with Kakko is look at Valeri Nichushkin. Like he was a first round pick and he was let go of by his first team and ended up being a huge, massive contributor to the Avalanche Stanley Cup run and then got a big deserved contract after that. And it's again, development's not linear. Everyone develops differently, and you got to look at the broader trend. Is the overall trend up? Like it's like a stock market; it'll be up and down and up and down. But as
Mhm.
long as the general trend is up, you got to be happy. And no one likes hearing this, including myself. But you got to be patient too, and just be understanding that put ourselves, think of yourselves when I mean, you are their age, so keep those fucking comments to yourself. But like, when I was 22, 23, like I had a tenth of the responsibility that some of these kids had and handled it way worse.
Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna transition to the final segment of the show this week, the Ice Cold Take segment. Remember, folks, if you're watching at home, listening on Spotify, watching on Millions, new streaming platform for us, Ice Cold Take is a noun, an accurate statement backed by facts and observations that is solid in nature, similar to a block of ice, i.e., spot on claim. I forgot to cue you in on this week. I was telling you about it last week. So I'll go first. I'll ease you into it. So I'm just gonna say I think Lafreniere, even though he struggled to get on the score sheet through 43 games this season and recently, I think he's gonna keep up his good play and he's gonna get finished with at least 50 points this season.
Nice. I like it. I will say, I think Kako will be a uniting force between the watch the game troglodytes and the look at the stat sheet nerds, in that he will be a player that both the watch the gamers and the ones that focus on the advanced stats can both look at and say, yes, he is better than what just the box score says. I think he will prove to be a bit of a uniting force there. Obviously, there are some folks on both end of that spectrum that there isn't anything that will ever get them to unite with the other side, right?
Yeah.
But among like the moderates in each camp, I think Kako will prove to be a uniting force where the folks that watch him and see the things he's doing in the offensive zone to carry possession and create space and enter the zone and stop transition chances against, and the advanced stats people who are looking to the data and seeing the micro stats showing how good he is in transition, or looking at the Rap'em chart, seeing his defensive impact, stuff like that. I will also say like, hey, he's better than his box score production indicates.
Hmm. You love that word, troglodytes. You
It's
use it
funny.
all the time.
Yeah, it's funny. And now I just say it flippantly, like
Yeah.
hence I insulted both sides purposely. But it's,
Yeah.
what I mean. You got those, some people that are just always yell, "Oh, watch the games, nerd," and then you get some people that will only quote certain stats and cherry pick to form their argument. And both sides can be equally annoying. And
Yeah.
and I think Kako can help bring some of them together.
In my like investigation into like what the stats mean, these analytics, everything that I've come across tells me that in order to come up with these analytics in the first place, you need to watch the game.
Well, that's why it's
It's
always funny when people
great.
say that, like Corey Snyder, like watch the game. It's like literally what he does is watch the game and manually track all this stuff.
I think he does it all by himself too. Like he
I
only
think he might have like I'll flippantly call it an intern, but like he might have one or two people that help him now. But no, yeah, he manually tracks a lot of this stuff. Like
it's
very
crazy.
few people will watch the game more than him. Or like people used to say that to like Dmitry Filipovich also, and it's like, that dude watches more hockey than any of us.
You're like you have to watch every single game start to finish too.
Yeah.
And it's hard to I bet it's really difficult to like say like, all right, is this chance like a one like scoring wise, you know what I mean? Like does this count as that? You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like cuz there's it could be it's one thing is not the same as another, like a clear, for example. It's like, all
Hmm.
right, well, it hit this player. Does that count as a clear still or something? Or is it
Yeah.
like because it got blocked by the
There's a lot of
player?
new. There's a lot of nuance in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I was talking to Mike Kelly a couple weeks ago, his company uses AI to figure
Hmm.
that out. And if there's
Yeah.
like a problem, then they go and they look at it to correct it to see, what the issue is. I think that's insane. But like when I talk to Corey, but like that tracking all of that is insane that you have to watch literally every second because hockey is such a fast moving sport. If you
Hmm.
like daydream doze off for a second, you miss like half of what's going on.
And
I just
especially too, like a lot of people when they say watch the game, they're really just watching the puck. They're not watching the full game. And so much of
right.
what happens actually is off the puck, and so it's hard, especially when you're watching at home, like because you're forced to look at just whatever the camera's showing you. And so they're both, and then stats like you can take, I'm someone who does a lot of statistical analysis and stuff at my job, and you can make stats tell whatever story you want them to if you know how to manipulate them properly. And so both
Mhm.
sites, both sides, if you're on a side where you only are kind of using one, you're wrong. It's you both. You do, watch, see what's going on, as well as look at the stat. All analytics are is information. So you take the more information and pair it with what you're seeing with your eyes, and then have a more informed opinion.
It's a lot easier to watch hockey if you zoom out, if you stop just looking at the puck and just zoom out and look at what
Hmm.
everybody else is doing.
Yep,
Because
but
a lot of people, when I
it's hard
try
to
and
train
get people,
yourself to do that.
yeah, yeah, when I tell people, you know, that say, "Oh, the puck's too small, I can't watch it." But it's, like, so fast and entertaining, like, don't look at the puck, look at everything else, like, look what
Hmm.
this player is doing, like, look at a lot of fights happen away from where the puck is,
Hmm.
so you have to look and see where the players are pushing and shoving each other, that's what I look for, I
Yeah,
love that, that's, like, one of my favorite parts about not just watching the puck, just zooming out and seeing what everybody else on the ice is doing.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, Drew, I know you got to go. Thanks so much for doing this with me. I appreciate you coming back on. I know we had the issues last week with my internet, thanks to the storm here in Jersey. But always welcome on the show. Good talking to you, man.
Always a pleasure talking to you, Joey. Thanks for having me on, and we'll be in touch.
All right.